Hitman 2-3, this is Hitman 2. What's the status? Over. 2-3, stand by. Goliath, this is 2 Bravo. Request permission to engage enemy paratroopers and attempt to snatch a grid Papa uniform 259er, 119er. Break.
Welcome. I'm your guest host today on the Commander's Voice. My name's Christopher Moon Mullins. I have the distinct honor of being the guest host today. We're going to talk with Lieutenant Colonel retired Arthur Ben Powers, one of my buddies, paratrooper buddies from 82nd Signal. I'm going to talk about his new book, Never a Dull Moment, just released just a few weeks ago, already on the shelf. What a fantastic history book to add to the library for the 82nd Airborne Division. And, me and Ben have talked about this book for years, I think. And it's just fantastic to finally see fruition of all your hard work. And again, never a dull moment. 80th Airborne Antiaircraft Artillery Battalion in World War II. Welcome, Ben. It's an honor to take your seat.
Hey, thank you, Moon. It's an honor to be on a podcast as great as the Commander's Voice. It is kind of weird being interviewed on the Chapters podcast, since I'm usually the guy doing the interviewing, but I'm really excited and I can't think of a better guy to lead the interview. So thanks for doing this.
That's so cool. Thank you. So tell me and tell your viewers a little bit about your inspiration to write this awesome book.
Okay, so the 80th Airborne Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion is one of those lesser known units. If you're a big World War II history nerd and you've read Philip Nordike or Clay Blair, you'll probably see references to the battalion in there. But most guys who served in the 82nd Airborne Division post-World War II, spent time at Fort Bragg, probably didn't even know of this unit's existence, and I certainly didn't. So way back in 2020, if we all remember what the COVID lockdown was like, folks weren't going out much, if at all, and people were turning to social media or other forms of digital entertainment just to kind of keep themselves occupied. So I was spending a little bit more time on the computer than normal, and I was on Facebook and joining different airborne associated groups and just kind of meeting people virtually. And a woman who was in Austria, of all places, who is a big World War II aficionado. She ran a World War II page on Facebook. Her name is Danny Stopsel. She sent out a message to the people who were on her page, her members, saying, is anybody willing to send a World War II veteran some birthday cards? I want to, fill this guy's mailbox with birthday cards. He's in a VA hospital and he doesn't have any visitors and it's COVID time. So let's square this guy away. I think we've all seen something like that on Facebook. So I reached out to Danny, like, hey, I'm happy to do it. What's the guy's address? And it's the address was a VA hospital in Arlington, Texas, which is fairly close to where I live. And I was like, oh, that's great. And she gave me his name. And I was like, well, when's his birthday? And she says, it's the 13th of June, which coincidentally is my birthday. And then,
Right.
as always, as veterans will always, ask this question, like, what did the guy do? What was his unit? And she's like, well, he was a gliderman in the 82nd. I'm like, holy cow, he's a glider guy in the 82nd. He's got my birthday. He lives close by. I need to arrange to see this guy. So I was able to go up and visit him on his birthday and with a group of other folks and kind of be socially distanced, but I got to meet him and we got talking and I was like, well, you're a glider guy in the 82nd. You must've been like 325. I'm just assuming he's an infantry guy. And he's like, no, I was in the 80th. I'm like, the 80th, what's the 80th?
Right.
And he explains to me about, well, it's the 80th Airborne Anti-Aircraft Artillery, but we weren't just anti-aircraft, we were anti-tank too. And he explains to me they had an anti-tank role. They were a battalion of 6 batteries. 3 were anti-tank, 3 were anti-aircraft, and he was initially trained as an anti-aircraft guy, and then he was trained as an anti-tank gunner, and it was just a fascinating story. I'm like, more people need to know about this. And
Right.
I was like, okay, well, people, you got to dig deep in Nordike or Blair or other stuff to find out about these guys. They don't have their own battalion history. Well, someone should do something about that. And then it occurred to me, well, I can do something about that. And here we are.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. And like you said, one of the niche kind of history pieces for a smaller battalion that's just turned into, a pot of gold. But now, did the 80th AAA battalion, did they have an association or a group that helped you with the research?
They did, and it was kind of defunct by the time I started researching. The only veteran I ever got to talk to was this gentleman, Cliff Stump, who is sadly he passed away last year, but we had a good friendship going for about 3 years. And I got to talk to Cliff. But I couldn't find any other living veterans. But the cool thing was doing online research, I came across this name, Bob Burns, and it was on one of the World War II
Right.
websites. And it was like, and his email address was there. So like, okay, I'm gonna reach out to Bob. And it turns out that Bob was sort of the historian of the 80th Airborne's Association back when it was active. And his dad had been a member of D Battery. I think I want to say his name was Edward Burns. And if I get that wrong, I need to go back and double check my book, but I'm pretty sure it was Ed Burns. But was the man. He had so many primary sources and records and messages from people, and he was willing to talk to me for hours on the phone. He sent me photos, he sent me documents, he answered my questions, and he was always very quick to point out that yeah, he did what he could to keep the not the regiment, but keep the Battalion Association alive. But he owed a lot of what work that he did to a gentleman named Ray Ferry. And Ray had been a young gunner in C Battery who fought during the war. And I mentioned him in the book. And Ray was very active in the 82nd Association up until his death. He passed away in 2014. And he was the guy who went to all the reunions and went to the conventions and kept the 80th memory alive and reached out and wrote to people. And he would share everything he had with Bob, and Bob would be the one who collated it and archived it and preserved it. So, Ray was kind of the front man and Bob was kind of the historian. So I credit both of them in the book, both in the acknowledgments and as resources, as people who really provided a lot of the material that I was able to use.
That's fantastic. Now, when you start talking about the 80th and, not being that well known, and like you said, you were surprised to hear of them and their existence. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think the 80th is not that well known, as the other, 82nd Airborne units from World War II?
I think there's two distinct reasons. The first one being that it was not around very long. It didn't exist prior to its establishment. Very soon after the 82nd Infantry Division was reflagged as an airborne division in 1942. I want to say it's like 2 September 1942 is the date it was established. And it cased its colors permanently in 1946 at the end of the war, once they returned home from occupation duty in Berlin. The table of organization of airborne divisions changed, the doctrine changed. So having this organic anti-aircraft battalion was it wasn't around long enough for successive generations of paratroopers to know about it. That was number one. Then number two, when you dig into the history of it, and you'll appreciate this as somebody who was in what we used to call the Bastard Brigade, the individual battalions that supported the infantry regiments. The batteries would be apportioned out in support of the different regiments based off who needed anti-tank or anti-aircraft artillery support. So if you get into a unit history, like the fighting in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge, different batteries were supporting different regiments. You had a battery supporting the 505th, for example, big fight in Belgium, and the battle honors that would be won by these guys would sometimes go to the regiment. So you would have somebody who might, there's two Distinguished Service Cross recipients, Lieutenant Werdick and Corporal Stokes Taylor, who both won the Distinguished Service Cross posthumously, or received the Distinguished Service Cross posthumously during the Battle of the Bulge. And if you look at certain historical accounts of what they did, that their actions are credited to the 505th, not directly to the 80th, although the actual award citations reference the 80th. But if you're like in the Division Hall of Fame or something, you'll see it that accredited to the 505th because of that support relationship. So the history of the battalion was obscured by the fact that it existed to support the regiments.
Of course, the story of our life, right?
Exactly.
So the 80th, they have an excellent war record. I read that in the book, and very well researched. And what do what action the battalion, because they had a lot of action, but what do you find the most compelling? I mean, and what draws readers in? What creates the most interest for your readers when they read stories like this? Because it is niche history and it's fantastic and it's written well, it reads well, and that's important. But based on their war record, what is the most compelling stories there? What should we look for in the book?
I think what you're going to see is to answer your question directly, it's going to come down to uh, a showdown between Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge, and specifically during
Nice.
Normandy, the fight for the Mer de River crossings at Lafayette and Chez de Pont. And if you come down on the side of the Battle of the Bulge, it's the fight at Trois Ponts. And my French is terrible. I don't speak French, so if my pronunciation is
Sure.
off, I do apologize. But Colonel Keith Nightingale, an author and paratrooper airborne ranger, a guy I have a lot of time for and whose books I enjoy immensely, has referred to Lafayette as the Gettysburg of the 82nd Airborne Division. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. That's where the legend of the 82nd was really established. And the 80th played a big role in that, in helping to both defend and take the crossings of the Marais. So there's a lot there around St. Mary-Glees. They set up, north of St. Mary-Glees
Right.
in support of the 2nd Battalion, 505th, south in support of 3rd Battalion. They supported Major Frederick Caesar Augustus Kellam's 1st Battalion in
Kellam.
securing Lafayette. So they played a big role in that. But if I had to choose between the two of those, between Belgium and Lafayette Causeway, I would say Belgium. I think that is the high water mark of the battalion's combat service. And the way I kind of lay it out in the book is when the battalions initially formed, it's formed from guys who were taken from the infantry regiments, who were told, hey, we're taking you out of the heavy weapons companies of the 325th to 326, and now you guys are in this new unit, and you are now, at the time, the Coast Artillery had responsibility for anti-aircraft
Right.
missions. So like, you're now Coast Artillerymen, and you're gonna be in this new unit with new leadership. And by the way, you guys are gonna be flying in gliders into combat. You don't have any choice in that. So they have to overcome a lot of leadership and training friction in a very short time
That's
between
awesome.
September of 42 and the spring of 43. Then they ship over to North Africa, and they get to spend some time training up with the British, and the British kind of lay it out for them what it's like to fight German armor. They get to Sicily after the big battle at Piazza Ridge, and they're kind of playing catch up. There's not a lot in the battalion war diary, the battalion history about the fighting in Sicily, because the big battles were took
Sure.
place before they even got on the island, and they were same thing when they went to Italy. The anti-aircraft batteries, D, E, and F, supported Darby's Rangers as part of Task Force Ranger, providing using the air defense weapons that they had, 50 caliber machine guns, in a sort of a direct support role.
Yeah.
But the anti-tank batteries had been prepped to participate in a operation called Giant 2, which was an airborne drop on Rome, which was aborted. So by the time that was aborted and they reconfigured and got to Italy, again, they weren't used in a major anti-tank role. They helped secure Naples, and they sort of provided a garrisoning and policing role, but there was not a lot of heavy combat. So you don't get into major combat in the anti-tank role until France. And they fought well in France, they fought well in Holland, and they learned along the way. They changed their MTO, they transferred E-battery from anti-aircraft to anti-tank because they knew they needed more anti-tank power. They upped gun from 37 millimeter guns to
Right.
57 millimeter guns because they knew they needed more firepower. They changed their doctrine of attaching a battery to a regiment for the duration of a campaign to being a supporting role is necessary, but moving the batteries around where the fighting was heaviest. They created a really effective anti-tank command
Capability,
post
right?
to manage. So they learned. So by the time they got to Belgium, they were this highly professional, highly competent battalion, and they just did this amazing job in support of the 505th fighting at Trois Ponts, stopped a pretty hefty advance by a German SS Panzer unit and enabled the division to very quickly go over onto the offensive when ordered to do so. And that the stopping power provided by the anti-tank guys, supplemented by additional anti-tank assets, as laid out in the book, it's really where they made their biggest contribution. So it's a very long-winded way to say their greatest action was in Belgium.
That's fantastic. And the beauty of that is that there's a lot of history there to bite into, and a bunch of leading questions like, hey, what did they do during X? What did they do during this time? And, uh, you know, and you articulated very well in the book the transformation in the MTO from smaller guns to bigger guns. And I thought you did that in a fantastic manner. Now, when you are doing the research for the 80th, did you find or did you discover, are there any 80th AAA members that survive today?
To my knowledge, no. The last one that I knew of for a fact was Mr. Stump, who was in E-Battery. And again, he passed away, I want to say on 23 June of 2023. And I wasn't able to find any others. Now I knew the stories of many of them through Bob Burns, who knew so many of these men, and he was very willingly shared all his stories about his dad's buddies. He had a lot to say about Ray Ferry, but I also got to know two other families, the Pratt family and the Holly family. William Pratt was the C Battery commander, and he finished the war actually as the Battalion S3. And his daughter-in-law reached out to me when she heard I was writing a book, and she had a bunch of questions. She was very interested in her family's history, but she also provided a great deal of documentation and photographs that really helped me make the book a much better product. And then as the book was nearing completion, I was contacted by the Holly family, whose dad had been an NCO in the battalion, and the book was already going into production, so I wasn't able to include any of the things that they provided to me. But we've established a fantastic relationship, and I've been able to get these folks linked up together as well. But as for all I know, there could still be members of the battalion, although they'd be approaching, their 100th birthday, but they could
That's
still
right.
be out there. But I have not met anyone other than Cliff Stump.
Fantastic. And, you know, you touched on this earlier, and I'm asking you to step back here, but, when people read the book and they, start covering the different campaigns the 80th served in, can you kind of recap that for us? Because it sounds like they were in, the Italian campaign, and then switched over when the 82nd went into training, and then went into the European campaign. But and you talked a little bit about how the division used them as the war progressed. But could you just give us a quick recap of that? What campaigns did they serve in,
Sure.
and how they changed their mission over time?
Sure, no problem. So the division itself uh, has campaign credit for 6 major campaigns. They have campaign credit for Sicily, Naples, Foggia, Normandy, Holland, the Ardennes, and the Central Europe campaign, which was 1945 through to VE Day, and even a little post VE Day. So that's
Right.
6 campaigns. And the 80th participated in all those campaigns. Now their contributions varied depending on what was going on. So initially, if we go all the way back to spring of 1943, in May of 1943, the entire 82nd Airborne Division deploys to North Africa. At that point, the North African campaign's over. The Axis forces have been kicked out of North Africa. The decision has been made for the Allies to sort of pursue a Mediterranean strategy. It's determined that a direct assault into Europe a la D-Day is a little premature for that, but they want to go maintain an offensive posture. So that it's determined the Allies will invade Sicily as a precursor to an invasion of the Italian mainland, and then they would open up a European front in Italy. And at the same time, planning is going on for an invasion of France, and then you would sort of have a two-pronged uh, assault towards Germany. So in July 1943, Operation Husky, that's the invasion of Sicily, the 505th under then Colonel James Maurice Gavin, 505th Regimental Combat Team leads off with their jump and the fight at Piazza Ridge to defend the American beachheads from German counterattacks. The 504th jumps
German
in
air, yeah.
the night after the 505th goes in. They are victims of a horrendous friendly fire incident when they're mistaken for enemy aircraft by Allied gunners on board the invasion fleet, the ships at sea, and they take a significant amount of casualties. So initially, the next night, the third night of the invasion, or D+2, the 325th and supporting elements such as the 80th were supposed to go into Sicily by glider. After the 504th was hit so badly, Ridgway made the determination, hey, we're going to scratch the D+2 mission because it's too dangerous. We could have another friendly fire problem. Eventually, within a few days, the 325th and supporting elements, to include the 80th again, are able to make administrative aircraft landings because enough terrain has been seized and it's safe enough for them to come in. And at that point, Patton's 7th Army is driving to the west of Sicily, and then they're going to make a move to take Palermo and then Messina. And the 82nd Airborne Division is part of that. But the 80th is, so late to the fight, they make a contribution, but there's no major battle in which they're participating. They're just kind of part of a very aggressive tactical road march. And that's not to belittle what happened in Sicily.
Sure.
But when you compare the level of contribution in later campaigns to the initial combat debut in Sicily, there's just not a lot there. The major actions had already been completed by the time the 80th made it.
And when you think about that, they probably quickly came to the realization of, how they needed to develop their mobility.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head, Moon, from the standpoint that by this point, the battalion commander is a guy named Ray Singleton. I think he's still a major at this point. He gets promoted to lieutenant colonel a little bit later in the war, but he didn't get to Sicily until almost a week after the major combat operations. And he made the determination that, number one, I need to get my guns into the fight quicker because the fight at Piazza Ridge was a infantry against armor fight.
Sure.
And the paratroopers were very lightly armed. They had 2.36-inch rocket launchers or bazookas. They had rifle grenades, but they took a lot of casualties. And they had some support from troops that were making the amphibious landing, but they had no real organic anti-tank capability. So Singleton's like, we've got to get the guns into the fight earlier. And the second thing he learned was, I need to get into the fight earlier to control the guns and help make decisions and help maximize the division's combat power. He's
Right.
unable to apply those lessons learned when the division goes into Sicily in support of the Salerno invasion. It's in September of 43. Again, he had been focused on the aborted airborne operation against Rome, and his battalion was sort of apportioned piecemeal. The anti-aircraft guns went into Salerno piecemeal. Initially, they were part of defending the beachhead. Then they get assigned to Task Force Ranger. The anti-tank batteries don't get there until a little bit later in the campaign, and they're very quickly part of the occupation of Naples. In November of 43, as part of the division's the 82nd Airborne Division's change of mission, with the exception of the 504th, which stays in Italy, the entire division is pulled out to go to Ireland or the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, to prep for the eventual invasion of France, or the Operation Overlord. So throughout the spring of 44, they moved from Northern Ireland to England. They're doing the train up to get ready to go into France. And this is where Singleton's ideas really come to fruition. They're able to upgun from 37 millimeter guns to 57 millimeter guns. They develop their doctrine of how they're going to do supporting versus attached relationships with the regiments. They do a lot of tactical training. They work out the kinks on how they're going to do the anti-tank command post. And on 6 June 1944, when the division goes into France, as part of the initial glider elements coming in just a few hours behind the initial parachute drops, two batteries of the 80th go in to the landing zones in the vicinity of St. Mary Gleaves, A and B batteries. And then that evening, they're followed by C battery. And the anti-aircraft elements are part of the seaborne echelon that gets there a little bit later, but they're an integral part of the campaign. Singleton goes in early. The anti-tank guns are available. They're able to help with those crossings of the Mardoray
Right.
River. And for the 33 days the division's in combat, all the batteries are present and doing their job. The anti-aircraft batteries very quickly transition into a supporting role where they're providing direct fire support to the regiments, taking ground objectives rather than just providing air defense. But they very quickly become a very effective part of the combined arms team in support of the regiments. And they refine that going into Holland, and then they maximize it during the Battle of the Bulge.
What a fantastic history of the 80th. And then when you look at that, I've gone through the book a few times and actually went through the manuscript probably 6 months ago. And, it always strikes me as not only is it a great story for World War II veterans and historians, amateur historians like myself, but when you look back as an active duty soldier, and you frame it up from that perspective, what are some of the lessons learned that today's leaders can extract or extrapolate from the 80th lessons learned in combat history?
For me, it was the idea of the importance of leadership and the importance of taking a good look at yourself. So initially, I even kind of try to align the chapters of the book with the idea of how you form a team, the importance of getting a firm base in doctrine, a firm understanding of what your unit can do, but then not to be constrained by that doctrine as you get experience, as you get out into the field, especially if you're in a deployed environment, learning from those who were there before you, taking the lessons that they learned, adapting your tactics, adapting your SOPs to the reality on the ground, and then refining them based off your own lessons learned once you get into combat, and then reinforcing those lessons as part of the basics, establishing and then adhering to those standards. So you can then rely on the team that you've built to go above and beyond if the situation calls for it. If you don't have that established baseline of standards, you're going to struggle just to meet the basic parameters of your mission, let alone being able to step up and deal with an extraordinary situation such as the surprise German attack in December of 44. So that's I hope those are the lessons that today's leaders can extrapolate from the book.
That's fantastic. Now, one more kind of series of questions, if you will, as we kind of close out here. Me and you have exchanged quite a few emails and quite a few middle of the day phone calls talking about our various projects and books and what's going on. But, two-part question here. Did you have any fun? And what was the best part of the book for you?
That's I think everybody always thought, oh, what a great question. But that is a really good question. I had fun at the start of the project because it was new, it was exciting. I got to talk to different people. I hit a tremendous writer's block that lasted months in the middle of the process. And it was that was a really rough time for me because it was I didn't know how I was going to proceed. And I felt like I was letting a lot of people down, to include myself. Like I wanted to do this for Cliff. I wanted to do this for the men of the 80th and the families. I wanted to do it for myself because it was something I committed to. And what I was writing to me just wasn't very interesting. Uh, Once I met the Pratt family and they kind of started sharing stories about William Pratt, that kind of renewed my motivation and gave me the will to kind of drive on. And after a little while after that, things kind of came together. And by the early 2024, I'd been working on this for 3 years off and on, dealing with this writer's block. About January of 2024, things just broke, and
Awesome.
I got motivated. I I was able to avail myself of some writing techniques that I learned through research and talking to different authors and apply them to my own writing. And then things just started rolling. And so like the last 6 weeks before the book was all of a sudden completed was the most fun because I was knocking out, uh, just pages a day and things were starting to work. And that's when the fun really started happening because this thing that I'd wanted to create for so long was finally coming together. All the research and information that so many people had shared with me, I was finally able to put it to words, and those words were interesting, and I could tie facts in with stories
Right.
and produce something. So that the fun really took place in the last 6 weeks of the process.
I can relate. And again, I know we've had many conversations about your book and the various books over the past few years, but again, Commander's Voice, great new book by Ben Powers, Never a Dull Moment. The 80th Airborne Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion. It's easy to say AAA. Again, the Airborne Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion. And it's a bastard battalion. But man, what a great history. Any closing remarks, sir?
It was it was an honor to be able to write the book. It was an honor to get to know Cliff Stump, Bob Burns, Mickey and Joe Pratt, Rick Hawley and his wife Kathy, and I wrote it for them. I wrote it for the memory of Ray Ferry and the memory of all those men, and it was just an honor to be able to do it. And I really appreciate you guest hosting the show and giving me a chance to talk about the work. So thanks, Moon.
No problem. My honor. Let's go ahead and close it out. And thank you for your time, sir.
All right, thank you, Moon. You take care.